and there was no trace of animal life, not even insects, not even worms, though that might be a function of the kinds of probes he was able to send. That meant the planet was ripe for a takeover by a colony, with no worries about native animals. By a Starways Congress edict, plants were only required to be preserved as seeds, samples, and data, not in situ. Animals changed everything, and large preserves, usually whole continents, had to be set apart to allow evolution to take its course. What the children could not know was that the presence of the alien ship was mere happenstance, though if two ships were to meet in space, it was far, far more likely to happen near a habitable planet than anywhere else. Bean had already been heading here. As soon as the ship's sensors determined that there was a planet with an atmosphere in the Goldilocks zone, he had bent the course of the ship ever so slightly to bring it to this location. If the alien ship hadn't drawn them, Bean would have suggested that they stop and investigate for the sake of pure science. Because if one thing was clear to him, it was that these children could not spend their lives in this ship. They needed a world. They needed a project to engage them. They needed a place where they could create children in vitro and raise them as fast as the artificial wombs on the ship could produce them. And here Carlotta thought she had a complete map and a complete inventory of everything on the ship. But Petra and Bean had planned from the start that whether or not a cure was found for the fatal giantism, their brilliant children needed a home, a place where they could develop their new genotype in safety. An uncharted world. If only Bean knew how much time he had. So far, he was still managing to keep his body functioning, mostly by doing as little as possible with his hands and legs, just enough stimulation to keep his blood from pooling. Exercise could kill him, but so could indolence. He could not allow himself to die until he was sure that the children would stay. He had figured that he could force them, if necessary, by crippling the ship. Now he wasn't sure that from the cargo hold he could do any damage Carlotta couldn't repair, so instead of trapping them he would have to persuade them. And he couldn't do that without having plans he could lay out for them, plans that made sense and sounded attractive. The alien ship changed everything. It represented a potential rival flora and fauna for them to contend with. If there were sentient beings aboard, sleeping colonists in stasis awaiting arrival, then it might be impossible for the children to grow up and raise families in safety. Bean would not live long enough to find another planet, and if he died before they found a place where they could put down roots, chances were they would return to the 100 worlds and the opportunity would be lost. If they survived to adulthood, their genome would be regarded as defective. Chances are they would be forbidden to reproduce. At least that's how the laws were shaping up on the most civilized worlds. Petra was long dead, but that didn't change Bean's promise to her. They had agreed that this was the best course for the Antonine children. He was not going to change his mind now. But he couldn't stop the children from doing what they wanted. He could still shape their world to some degree by withholding information from them. But these weren't ordinary 6-year-olds, ready to believe in magic and ghosts if an adult told them such stories. The only information he could be sure of keeping from them was the secret of his own plans and intentions. Yet he still had enough power over the ship, and over them, that his plans and intentions were the most important facts in their environment. Until he died. After 2 days of study, Ender had his report ready, and so did Carlotta and Sargent. They gathered in the cargo hold for show and tell. Ender began it. "This is a formic ship," he said. "The proteins in the rat crab are the complete set of formic world proteins, with no extras. But here's the odd thing. The DNA is almost identical to the Formic's own genome as gathered and recorded from the many corpses after the war. There are key differences, but they're localized. It's as if the Formics went for a kind of perverse neoteny. These rat crabs seem to be a deliberate throwback to an earlier stage in Formic evolution, with these savage claws spliced on, and a hard carapace which is only vestigial in the adult Formics. Carlotta and Sargent understood the implications at once. "So the Hive Queens can modify their own offspring," said Sargent. "They decided that some of their babies would be those little monsters. I doubt they thought of them as their children anymore, if they ever did," said Carlotta. "When you have babies by the thousand, I bet the Hive Queens had no qualms about regarding a few of them as animals." Bean refrained from the obvious comparison. They wouldn't have appreciated the jest. "Any idea how they reproduce?" Carlotta asked Ender. "This one was a female," said Ender. "It seemed fully capable of reproduction, but not on a large scale, and it had no egg developing inside it." He turned to Sargent. "Did this one look any different from the others?" "It looked closer, mostly," said Sargent. "They were moving fast and coming right at me. All I had was a general impression of their size, but they seemed all the same." "So maybe they were all female, like worker Formics," said Ender. "Or else